Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Stacy, and I'm a bookseller at Belmont Books, and I'm also the events coordinator. Belmont Books, for those of you who are not familiar with us, is an independent and locally owned bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that we have a number of virtual events coming up, including our monthly bedtime story time tomorrow night and the launch of best-selling author Larry Olmsted's new book, Fans, which he will discuss with Tom Bedell on Tuesday. You can register for these and our other events on our website, belmontbooks.com, which is also where you can purchase Nancy's book, The Kindest Lie. If you have any concerns during the presentation, you can send a message in the chat section. If you have any questions for the authors, please type them into the Q&A section, and we will get to as many questions as we can after the presentation. We're very excited to welcome Nancy and Jenna. I want to tell you a little bit about them, and then I will turn the event over to them. A native of Chicago's South Side, Nancy Johnson worked for more than a decade as an Emmy-nominated, award-winning television journalist at CBS and ABC affiliates in markets nationwide. Her debut novel, The Kindest Lie, has been reviewed by the Washington Post and is featured on Entertainment Weekly's Must List. It's been named one of the most anticipated books of 2021 by numerous publications. Booksellers nationwide selected her novel as an Indie Next pick, and librarians chose it for library reads. Nancy's work has been published in Real Simple and Oh, the Oprah magazine. A graduate of Northwestern University and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Nancy lives in downtown Chicago and manages brand communications for a large healthcare nonprofit. Jenna Blum is the New York Times and #1 international bestselling author of the novels Those Who Save Us, The Storm Chasers, and The Lost Family. She was voted one of the favorite contemporary women writers by Oprah.com readers. Jenna is based in Boston, where she earned her MA from Boston University and has taught fiction and novel workshops for Grub Street writers for 20 years. She is the CEO and co-founder of the literary social media company, A Mighty Blaze. And without further ado, I will turn the event over to Nancy and Jenna.
Thank you so much, Stacy, and thank you to Belmont for hosting us tonight. I am privileged to live in Massachusetts, where I did many events with Belmont when we were in 3 dimensions, and I just love being able to connect online this way. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I see Ron Block is in the house.
Yes, we love Ron, Uncle Ron. There's a story behind that.
Ooh,
which we
all
can
right,
do.
all right. I will ask you about that for sure.
Okay, that sounds good.
You're
And
gonna-
Julie Carrick-Dalton.
Yes, oh,
literary
Julie, are you
BFF.
here? Oh my gosh,
Julie's
that's so
here.
exciting. We just had Julie on A Mighty Blaze this week, talking about
Yes.
her debut, Waiting for the Night song. And so Nancy and Julie are debut twins, I know, and you have a special nickname, which is Juicy. For Nancy
Juicy,
and
we
Julie.
do, we
Yep.
do. That's something that her husband coined.
I'm so
It's a
good.
mashup of our names, Julie and Nancy. Get it? Juicy.
I do, and I bet
Got
you
it?
also, like, you know, juicy writer chicks. So I kind of
Yeah.
feel like it's a good thing.
Yeah, double meaning there.
You got the juice. I'm
Yeah.
very excited that you guys are in the house, and thank you all for showing up. Kindest Lie, if you haven't had a chance to read it yet, is fantastic. It deserves all of the accolades that it has been getting. It was the most anticipated debut by everybody, basically, right? It was like Pop Sugar and Oprah.com and Oprah Magazine and Real Simple and the Washington Post and the Chicago Tribune. And it was hard to keep track of all the
To
accolades.
memorize, that's really good.
Well, because I've been watching them with such great admiration as you track across my literary sky like a comet. I'm like, there she goes again.
Ah.
Right? And it's such a spectacular thing to see happening, especially with somebody's first book. And I imagine with a first book in a pandemic, it's especially gratifying to see your first baby get this kind of warm welcome and response. But audience members, I will tell you, if you haven't had a chance to read it yet, these accolades are well deserved. It's not just like Nancy just happened to stumble into being the flavor of the month. I read The Kindest Lie finally after having had it in my possession for like months. I sat down to read it this week, and it kept me up late. And I was saying in the green room that it reminds me a little bit of my favorite novels from Belva Plain, who's a Jewish family saga writer who's like my comfort food. But the commonality here is that all of Belva's novels have a family secret at their core that threatens to come to life and explode a character's brand new, newly constructed, comfortable life. And I just love that. And I feel as though so many of us can hook into what happens when our pasts come back, or the things that we thought we had left behind come back to haunt us. And what is it like to go home again? So that was my sort of encapsulation of what the book is. Nancy, would you please describe your beautiful baby for us in your own?
You did a wonderful job with it. I think those are many of the themes. And I think the interesting thing is that everybody who reads it, you bring your own life experience to it. And so different people connect with different parts of the story. But when I talk about it, I say it's a story of family, sacrifice, and love, all of it at the dawn of the Obama era. And the story is about this woman named Ruth Tuttle. She's a very successful Ivy League educated Black chemical engineer. She's definitely on the come up. You know, the world is her oyster. She's got this great new townhouse, wonderful husband. And her husband is like, it's time to have a family, you know, let's have some babies. And she can't do that yet because she doesn't want to move forward with starting a family with him until she deals with her past and her secret. And her secret is that she gave birth to a baby when she was just a teenager, and she left him behind in the dying Indiana factory town where she grew up. So to make peace with her past and to figure out what happened to her son, she goes back to her hometown to search for her son. And when she gets there, nothing is the same, of course, you know, and she finds out that her grandmother and her brother have been keeping a lot of secrets of their own too from her. And I won't spoil that by telling you what those secrets are. We'll have to read the book to find out. But she also, when she gets there, she meets and forms this unlikely connection with a young, poor white boy nicknamed Midnight. And the two of them are on this collision course of race and class. And both of their lives and the lives of the people they love are changed forever.
That was a beautiful description and an encapsulation of the prismatic nature of this book, because it has so many things in it. So if you hold it up to the light one way, it's a family secret book. If you hold it up another way, it's a book about race. It's a book about class. It's a book about motherhood. It's a book about demographics. I felt Ruth has this, as she says, and her friends say, this bougie life in Chicago, which, you know, I love. I'm like, oh, I would like that life. I'm trying to live.
Are you bougie tonight?
I think I'm bougie tonight. I think so
bougie.
I'm trying to be bougie. I aspire to bougie. I aspire to be my Bitmoji, who's very bougie. But I think about Ruth going home to her hometown, to Gaston. Do you pronounce it Gaston?
Ganton.
Ganton, sorry.
Ganton, Ganton.
Ganton, right? Indiana, right? Which is
that's it.
Gary. Why did I think Gaston? See, I'm bougie.
See, so
it's Gaston now.
No, just
no, it's Ganton. All right, so she goes back to Ganton, and I felt like Ganton itself was such a character in the novel as well, and the contrast between her life that she lives as an adult and the life she had as a child. All of this is so beautifully depicted and so atmospheric. What, in all of this, like, beautiful spectrum, what was the key into the book for you? What did you start with?
I started with these themes around race and class and wanting to interrogate that. I was inspired by the events of 2008 when Obama was elected president. It was just such a poignant time for me, and in our nation's history, there was all this hope that just felt palpable to me. And I think it was a lot of people. It didn't matter if you were a Democrat or not. It wasn't about only the Black community feeling that sense of hope. I think many people were feeling that, no matter who they were. And but at the same time, you had all these people saying, I think we're now entering a post-racial era because we have a Black president. And I'm like, no, I know that's not the case. We are not post-racial. That's a fallacy. Because I remember Facebook was kind of all the rage then, or at least I was new to Facebook. I think it was kind of new then in 2008. And so I just recall this divide, the chasm between Black and white. And a lot of the people that I was seeing saying all of these racially tinged things were people that I had worked with in the past or had gone to school with. And it was really an eye-opener for me, you know, as somebody who I've always known that, you know, racism exists in America and it's a 400+ year history of racism. But to see it, you know, right there in front of me and my social media feed with people I knew, that was so interesting to me. And you had so many in white America saying, you don't really see us and understand us and what we're going through. And so there was just this divide, not just racially, but culturally and socioeconomically. And so that was my way into the book. And so then I had to think about, I didn't want to write a book about race and class, of course, not a, I didn't want it to be, like a nonfiction book or a treatise on, those issues. And I didn't want to be didactic or moralistic, but I needed to have a story to bring people into these issues and to interrogate those issues. And that's how I came up with the characters of Ruth and Midnight and thought of the motherhood story.
Beautiful. So the consciousness of racism and class in the book, and the chasm between black and white, and the polarization we've seen explored and expanded in the past 4 years, that has left us so broken and wondering, what do we do now? All of that is folded into this novel, like eggs into a cake, but it's not like when you're eating the cake, you taste the eggs. It's just like this beautifully made cake. But I was very conscious while I was reading this of my own sort of bougie white girlness, and reading it for the same reason that I always read fiction that I love, which is to experience something from somebody else's skin and vantage point from within their skin, and to say like, oh, okay, so this is what this experience would look like to this character. To me, it looks like this. Now I feel like there's a bridge there. So I loved that about reading this book. And if you also, like me, are like really conscious of your like bougie white girlness, and you're like, oh my God, how do I even understand what it's like to be Black in this country? Like, this book I thought was such a good doorway into that experience, into the experience on many levels, into Ruth's experience.
Oh, I'm glad that you felt that, because that's what I was hoping for, is that people could walk in the footsteps of somebody else whose life experiences are so vastly different from their own. And it's interesting that you talk about the last 4 years, and because so many people think that I wrote the book during the last 4 years, during the Trump presidency. Actually started writing it during the second term of Obama. And it's just surreal and uncanny that so many of the themes and the situations that I talk about that happened in 2008 in my novel are just such parallels to where we are right now as a country. And one is the election of a president. So many people were looking for a political savior, I think, in Obama. And they're also looking for that same thing, I think, with Biden and Harris. Many are, and also the socioeconomic parallels too. In 2008, we were going through the Great Recession, and, you had the bank foreclosures and plants that were closing, and so many people losing their livelihood. And that is a parallel to where we are right now during the pandemic, with a lot of people struggling financially. And I think that's just an environment that's ripe for racial tensions. It just seems like when we're under financial strain, it exacerbates the racial tension. And you saw a lot of racial tension during the Obama years, obviously not just during the campaign, but during his presidency, with the Trayvon Martin killing, for example, the Charleston, South Carolina church shooting. Then all those countless names of Black people that we heard on the news, say their names, the people who were killed. And then last year with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and countless others. So it just seems like they were a mirror of each other, these two time periods.
I read every morning when I wake up Heather Cox Richardson, who's a history professor from Boston College, and she collates the previous day's news and then puts it in historical perspective. And I love this. And she corroborates exactly what you're saying, which is that in times of economic distress, it's when right-wing movements tend to be especially prevalent, and you start to see the veneer of civility in a society crack open more, and these movements start to come more to the surface, which is what I feel like we have been seeing. So The Kindest Lie is actually, it's such a refreshing book to read right now, because it doesn't pretend that none of that stuff is going on. I remember in 2008, it was the first time I had to sieve my Facebook feed to call out people I thought were friends, but who were saying these incredibly racist things. And I was so shocked, because I loved Obama. I wrote to Nancy when I read the first pages of the book that I couldn't make it through the first chapter without crying, because it was about the Obama election. And I was like, I love him so much.
All that nostalgia, right?
Right. But I mean, nostalgia, but he's still there, and what he represents is still there. It's still here. It's still in us. And I think it was, by a very narrow margin, elected in the last election. But just thinking about that experience, I felt so proud and so energized by Obama's election. I was living in Kansas then, and I was like one of 2 Democrats in Kansas. And I used to go to the gym with my Obama t-shirt and be like, who wants to fight? And like, nobody cared. I'm like, Obama. And they're like, yeah, whatever. But it never occurred to me, because I don't feel it on a sort of a cellular DNA level, that it's not just me being a hopeful plugged in citizen. It can actually be a life changer for Black Americans who think, finally, right, finally now somebody sees us and we don't have to worry about getting shot when we go out the door.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you're saying. And I felt that same sense of hope. And it's kind of like when it happened, when he was elected, there's this, and I tried to show this in that first chapter, that a lot of Black people were just walking around with a new swagger, this sense of confidence. My president is Black, like that means something. And you feel like here's somebody who looks like me, who has my experience, who's in the highest office in the land. And that was just such a wonderful feeling. And that's why I have that piece in the book where at the end of the first chapter, where Ruth and Xavier are talking after their big election night party. And Xavier says, you know what, I think I'm taking, I think it was chitlins, to the office today, because it was about 2 or 3 in the morning. And and that's like more of a stereotypical Black food. And so that's what he was like, I'm taking that to the office. And I remember one of my best friends' brother, she's Black and her brother's Black, saying to me that, oh, we got a Black president. He's like, I'm not even going into the office tomorrow, just this feeling of I can do and be anything because of who the president is. And it's hard to explain to people who didn't feel it on that same level. I think there's so many people felt proud and happy and like we had really transcended a barrier. But I think for many in Black America, it was just a different kind of pride. And I think I said in the book too, that this feeling of never and wait and not so fast, that we don't have to feel that anymore. And, but I think then in the rest of the book, you see what happens when there's kind of that lack of hope. And it shows you that so many things that were in place before Obama came into office were still there. They're still present. And they're still with us today. I mean, you just look at the insurrection at the Capitol and what that was all about. A lot of that was about race and about suppression of Black votes and about part of white America trying to hold on to something, that they believe they're losing because of the browning of America.
Which never was really there in the first place.
Right.
Hope they have that Wizard of Oz moment where they wake up in the bed at the end and be like, well, that actually wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
There has never been a perfect white America. So, and hopefully there never will be.
But white people have been in power and
yes,
they're still in power in America. And that's what they want to hold on to, I think.
Yes.
Is that feeling of power and having somebody below you, at least even though I may be poor and maybe in this particular socioeconomic bracket, there's always somebody below me that I can look down on and be better than. And quite often that's Black people.
That's so interesting. I have been hearing that for the last 4 years. I've been hearing from people who are first generation immigrants, like surprisingly anti-immigrant sentiment. And I finally figured out that maybe that was why, that you would think somebody who had just come to America and finally made it to a place of security would be more likely to hold out a hand, but it was more a fear of like, oh, if I'm not at the bottom of the ladder, somebody needs to be below me so I'm not the last one to get kicked off again. So maybe there is that, but I'm hoping that in the same way that we still have the insurrection and the racism and all of this entrenched in American DNA, there's also the memes and the TikToks of the little girls saying, my VP looks like me, and just like all little girls, like little Black girls and little girls of Indian descent and little girls in general, and just the sort of hopefulness that a lot of us feel when we look at Georgia. And we're going to have to every day to not have voter suppression, because anyway, I'm like taking you down this political path. I wanted to talk about the book.
No, but it's interesting. Yeah, but I do feel that sense of hope that you're talking about, that we saw with this most recent election, and just and not just the symbolism of having a vice president who's Black and South Asian, but like you said, what happened in Georgia, the mobilization of all kinds of people, particularly the Black community, and saying you're not going to suppress our vote, led by Stacey Abrams and so many other community organizers and leaders who said, no, we're going to do something. We're going to stop all the gerrymandering and all this other stuff, that came together and did that. And then last year with all the people who marched and people of all races and ethnicities and backgrounds and ages, who got together and stood in solidarity, marched in solidarity, for, an anti-racism movement. I just thought that was beautiful, and it gives me hope for our future.
I find it tremendously hopeful also. I was at some of the marches and there were so many young people and so many people of, it's a patchwork of backgrounds. It was beautiful. Speaking of which, can you talk a little bit about midnight in the book? There is a comment in the chat from Anissa. Hi, Anissa. Anissa is like
Anissa,
my girl. We love Anissa. I know.
Anissa's everywhere. She's like the #1 reader fan.
She is. She's like Glinda. Like she's always in the bubble, like floating around every author event.
Yeah. And Francine. I don't know if Francine's here, but she's the other big reader fan as well. So
Anissa, and Ron, you guys are like
Ron.
Yes. Ron. So Anissa said Midnight was her favorite character, and I was really interested. Midnight is this young white boy who Ruth befriends when she goes back to Ganton, and Midnight names himself because, well, you tell it. You tell why Midnight.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I don't know if he necessarily named himself, but he got that nickname because he hangs around with a lot of Black kids. For one thing, he's isolated a lot in school and stands on the outside of things and is not always accepted by all the kids for a variety of reasons. But he hangs around with a lot of the Black kids, and then he starts trying to act Black and all that. And the teacher kind of gets on him about trying to walk like the Black boys and move like the Black boys, and he doesn't really understand like why that's a bad thing. He's so innocent in many ways, and clueless about these kinds of things. But because of that, they start calling him Midnight because he's always hanging around, Black and brown kids. And he doesn't really know, which I say in the book, he doesn't know if they're calling him that because they like him and this is a cool nickname, or if they're making fun of him, but it just kind of sticks. And, but his father doesn't really like to call him that, so he normally calls him Patrick, which is his given name, his birth name.
And it's such an incongruous name for Midnight. I feel like Patrick just conjures up a person who he is so not. One of the things that I loved about the book as well is not just the consciousness of race and how that filters into different aspects of people's lives in many tributaries in many ways, but how class consciousness was so prevalent. And it reminded me a little bit of Sarah Marsh, who's a white woman from Kansas who writes a lot about poverty. Her family was really poor, and she wrote a book called Heartland about growing up poor in America's breadbasket, and then went to Washington to be a policy advisor. And like Ruth, she's one of the first people in her family the first women to not have a child out of wedlock and then remain a single mom and raise that child as a single mom. And she talked about that breaking her cycle of poverty. And I was thinking about Sarah Marsh while I was reading The Kindest Lie, because I was thinking about Ruth's situation, but also about Midnight. Like Midnight is a very disenfranchised character, and he is a white character. And so I was wondering, when you were thinking about this pastiche of people you were putting together, how did you come up with him as a character?
Yeah, well, I didn't want to feed into all the stereotypes, like, okay, so all the Black people are going to be poor and the white people are going to have money. You know what I mean? I didn't want to do that. And so you've got Ruth, who's really lived in both worlds. She's coming from more of the working class background. And yet now she's in this more upper middle class lifestyle as an engineer. But yet that life that she used to have, it stuck with her in many ways, because I have just the little details, like the fact that I mentioned that, if there's a storm and the lights go out, she kind of wonders, oh, does this mean we didn't pay the bill? We couldn't afford to pay the light bill, the electric bill? So there's just those vestiges of that life that are still with you and they never really leave you. And in terms of Midnight, yeah, you're right. I mean, he's really going through a rough time in terms of his family. He's got a father, Butch Boyd, who is working at the auto plant and has lost his job, and can't really can't even provide for himself, let alone for Midnight anymore. And the mother is not there anymore. And then he's got grandmother trying to keep her shop afloat, and she's struggling, trying to take care of him, as well as her other daughter and her daughter's, kid. So there's all these financial and economic dynamics and stressors that Midnight is under. But the interesting thing I wanted to show with Midnight, while he's in this particular class situation, he's still white in America. And so I was interested in depicting how his white privilege and the way, in spite of his socioeconomic situation, he's able to move through the world and through Ganton a lot more freely than his Black and brown friends are.
Mhm. White privilege, I think, is invisibility. People don't see you, right? If you're whatever you're doing, it's not your fault because you're white. So and you don't think about it. I think
You don't have to think about it. You don't have to see
about
it. Right. Because this is just right, because you're already, in this position of privilege. So you don't have to
right.
recognize it. And so that's how he's able to move through the world the way he does. Part of it is he's 11. So he's young and he hasn't experienced a lot yet, so I give him a break there. You know what I mean? It's not like he's just, oblivious. He's oblivious because of his age, but also there is that layer of privilege where he doesn't have to think about it. Whereas Corey does have to think about it. He's got parents who've had the talk with him, about how to carry himself and comport himself as a Black boy in America.
Mhm. When I was a little girl, the talk meant the sex talk. And
Right.
and
So now
to
the
that
talk
and the
is
Kindest Lie as
evolved.
well, that somebody said you had to talk with him yet, and
Yeah.
the character laughs and says, no, he's too young for the sex talk, and she's like, that's not what I mean. I mean, did you have the talk about keep your hands out of your pockets when you talk to a cop, like
Yeah. Keep your
don't talk
hands
back,
visible.
show them that you're don't
Yeah.
say
You're not.
back off. I remember
Exactly.
sometime in the last 4 years, I became conscious that this is such a great example of white privilege, that we only have one talk with our parents, whereas children who are Black have two talks. And arguably that one is the more important one in terms of survival. And I just think that's just so awful.
Yeah.
So I was glad that you mentioned that. And Midnight has this friend, Corey, who's Black. And every time the two of them are getting up to some shenanigan, like stupid
Right.
little
They're
boy
just
shenanigans,
kids.
he's the one who gets blamed for it because he's Black. So
Exactly.
even though Midnight is often the instigator. One of the things I loved too about the book, the viscerality of the characters' experiences, and Midnight and his friends, I just thought were done so well. Like I have a brother who's 10 years younger. And I remember when he was a kid and I was sort of raising him while my mom worked, he was so wiggly and like so energetic and always doing stupid bleep, like always kicking out screen doors. How did you capture that puppy, little boy energy so well?
I don't know. I did talk to friends who have boys around that age, so picked up a few things from that. But I wanted him to be energetic, like you said, a little mischievous, and that's part of the initial conflict, I think, with Ruth before they become close. There's a little bit of friction there because he's so different from the way she is, and so I thought that was interesting. And also with Midnight, I just wanted to also just show that even though he's mischievous and all that, he's still trying to be accepted, trying to be loved, wanting his friends and everybody to like him. And people often ask me like which character was, like the easiest to write or the most difficult. And I think Midnight for me was one of the easier characters, even though we were so different. But I know what it's like to have been bullied as a kid because I was, particularly around second, third grade. And so I infused Midnight with a lot of my own emotions of what I went through when I was his age. And I know what that's like to try to ingratiate yourself and endear yourself to people. And I didn't go as far as he was. I was definitely more on the quiet side. But I tried to think about what are the things that a kid like that would do to be seen, because a lot of times you feel like people don't see you. I mean, his father is preoccupied with his own troubles. His grandmother, Lena, is too busy to spend time with him, and he's craving that attention. And it's like sometimes you have to act out to be seen and to be heard, for people to recognize you. And that's what he does. It's a lot of it is a cry for love and acceptance.
It's so apparent, and it's so instinctive. It's kind of like his energy shoots out of him, like he's having a like out of body experience. He's never thinking anything through, but he's just like, I'm here.
Yeah, like there's that one of those initial scenes with him when he's in the car with his dad in the back of the truck, and his dad doesn't know he's there, and then he pops up and he's like asking a million questions, like science related questions. And did you know this? And yeah, I heard this. And his dad just kind of like, shut up pretty much. But,
Did you know that a cockroach can live how many days?
yeah, yeah,
It's like his bonding thing with Ruth, which I totally love. Like both of them are sort of science geeky and
yes.
their connection to each other, their sort of wink friend connection, which I loved.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to show that they have things in common that bond them and that whole piece of being on the outside of things and needing that sense of family connection and belonging. They both share that in addition to the fact that they're both science geeks. So yeah, I think there are many ways that we transcend race in terms of just the commonalities, the things that we share, the universal need to be loved, the universal, need to achieve and to be better and to be more than what you are.
And also those sort of archetypes that hopefully surpass any sort of racial prejudice, which is people need mothers. And people see children that they feel warmly toward and they don't have their child. So they're like, okay, maybe you're sort of my surrogate child. Like I find myself mentoring a lot of people sort of inadvertently because I don't have children. And I think, oh, this woman could be my daughter's age. So that sort of lock and key thing that Ruth has missing her son, although she hasn't thought about him for many years, but when she starts to think about it, there's a boy-shaped hole in Ruth.
And then he's looking for a mother.
He's looking for a mother.
Yeah. And so
it's not, but it's not a like a sort of a hallmarky sort of fit either. Like it's a sort of awkward fit. And Ruth is very stern with him, which I kind of love. She's actually a really good mom, I think. But can you talk about Ruth's motherhood a little bit? There's a moment in the book, I don't want to spoil, but it is after she gives birth to the son that she doesn't bring with her into her adult life and goes back to Ganton to find. And the first thing she says to him after he's born was like so brave. I thought like it was a brave authorial choice. And so shocking to me. I thought I knew when she picked up the baby exactly what she was going to say. And I'm like, oh, here comes, and it was not that. And I thought, damn, you went there. That made the whole book feel so real to me, even more than it already did from its viscerality. And I just thought, this woman really gets it. I'm sitting up now, like respect, I'm paying attention. So can you talk about her motherhood a little bit?
Sure. I don't know if I should say what she says. Maybe people can read the book and find out. A lot of people
best read the book and find out. Don't you need to read the book and find out? Those of you you're like, oh, I know what she's talking about, but you need
to. Because this wasn't an expected thing for her. She didn't plan to get pregnant and have a baby. So she wasn't planning on motherhood. She had a high school boyfriend that she was really into and she got pregnant, and that happens. But that moment you're talking about where she's giving birth, I really put a lot into that because she was so conflicted at that time. She's a mother because she's carrying a baby inside her, but she doesn't know whether she really wants to be a mother. And, part of her does, there's just something instinctual that wants to hold on to this baby. This is my baby. And I have a moment when she does give birth and she holds on and doesn't want to let go of her baby because this is a part of her. And so in that sense, she's feeling like a mother, but also she's thinking of life beyond this little bedroom where she's giving birth and beyond the town of Ganton, Indiana, where she can leave motherhood behind too. So there's the lure of that. And so there's just such a tension there in terms of motherhood and what that means for her. And I think she believes that she can walk away from it. But as you see throughout the years, even though she walks away during that 11-year absence, she's often looking at boys on the street and wondering, is this my son? And thinking about it, thinking about what his life might be like. There's guilt that comes with motherhood for her because she escaped, Ganton, her hometown, and made something of herself. And she worries about, as a mother, did I leave my son behind languishing in this environment that I managed to escape? Because she says the soil, the very soil of Ganton, Indiana is like a trap, and then it just sucks you in and it doesn't let you out. And from her perspective, she manages to escape, but she's left her child behind there. And what is his life like? And I think once she meets Midnight and she sees what he's like in his environment, she begins to fear that her son may have met the same fate.
Ganton is, as I said in the beginning, a character in and of itself. That Ruth is living in. Is she in Chicago or a suburb of Chicago as an adult?
as an adult, she's in Chicago. It's a neighborhood, kind of um, a changing neighborhood, more of a gentrified
Okay.
neighborhood in Chicago, but it's in the city on the south side.
And she goes back to a small town that's an industrial town.
Yeah.
One of the things that I loved, I have a family house in a small rural Minnesota town, and I love the descriptions of how just the descriptions of houses and the descriptions of food and the descriptions of nature of the Wabash River in this book, and how everything was so familiar to her, and yet acted as a sort of a quicksand, like pulling her back, but pulling her back with love, and also pulling her back with fear that she might never get out again. How did you create the character of Ganton?
Yeah. A lot of people have asked me if Ganton is a real place.
I would never ask you that. As a writer, I'll never ask you that.
People have said they Googled Ganton, Indiana to see if they could find it, and they were not able to. But I was able to draw upon experiences that I've had. When I was a reporter, I worked, one of my first jobs was in Kenosha, Wisconsin. There was a Chrysler plant that had closed about 6 years prior to me moving there. So I had that experience of seeing, how a town has changed when it loses its industry. I've got family in Gary, Indiana, steel mill kind of town. I have family in Anderson, Indiana, that had a GM plant that was the beating heart of that town, kind of similar to what we see in Ganton. So a few different experiences, but I've never lived in that kind of town. But you're right, it is a character in the story in many ways. And there's just this pull of it. And there are the memories. And so I have her kind of struggling with the tension between the different memories. She's got memories of her grandfather, who is now passed, and just the two of them at the river fishing, just hand in hand, that's part of her memory. And that's the beauty of it. She remembers playing games and doing things with her big brother, Eli, they're just all these memories that are beautiful memories for her. But also when she goes back, she sees how the town has changed. The factory, the plant has closed. That's one thing. But also when she goes downtown, the streets feel more narrow. Everything feels more closed in and smaller and claustrophobic, especially when you've been gone for so long and you've lived in a big city. When you go back, it's like, oh, wow, Yeah, just seeing her house that she grew up in, all of those memories.
House, some sort of leaning house. I know, and she's nostalgic enough about it and finds it familiar enough that she says to her mama, her grandmother, what would it have been like if I had stayed here? Like she's having some remorse, and her mama says, well, you would have ended up like your friend Natasha, whose husband is cheating on her. And
right.
You don't build a rosy picture of the past. And I think it's such a compelling thing about The Kindest Lie that Ruth is a sort of an immigrant in her own right within the country, which you see as part of the American story, is from a small town to a larger city and from one economic class to another. So there's so many questions I would love to ask about.
And there's love in the town too. I want to also say that there, because I kind of toy with that whole idea of escaping, for Ruth, she feels like she's escaping something. And I always think, what does it mean to escape where you're from? You know what I mean? These are your roots, your people. And there is plenty of love and light in Ganton as well, that I try to show in the town. So it's not all like, oh God, it's not everything that she thinks it is in terms of, needing to escape it.
Totally. It's not like a John Cougar Mellencamp song. Like she goes back and she's like, oh, there are really beautiful things about being here. Maybe I should have stayed. One of the questions in the chat, we have a bunch of questions in the chat from our audience. And one of them, you mentioned being a reporter for a long time, not just in Kenosha. And how does that, this is from, is this Julie Rold, who I know and love? Hi, Julie. How does your experience as a reporter come to bear in terms of writing fiction, and what was that transition like?
Yeah, sure. So I worked as a reporter for 11 years in television news as a reporter. So I started in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Then I went on to Madison, Wisconsin, to the CBS affiliate, was there a number of years. Then went to West Palm Beach, the ABC affiliate there, and then the CBS affiliate in Tampa Bay. So I had a pretty long television career. It kind of turned into, if it bleeds, it leads, we used to say. Like I'd be on this really cool feature story, that human interest piece that I was interested in. And then the, police and fire scanners would go off. There'd be like a triple homicide, another county over, and I'd have to go cover that. And So I kind of got tired of that, and that's why I got out of the business. But I didn't go into writing novels right away. So, for a period there, I was doing corporate communications, public relations, which is what I still do as my day job. But I learned a lot from reporting. A lot of it is about being curious and asking questions and getting to know people. When you talk about the kinds of characters I created in The Kindest Lie, I haven't lived all those experiences. But I remember, working as a reporter in Wisconsin and Madison and the surrounding areas. I've been on a lot of dairy farms and talked to people and, whose lives are very different from my own. And so I think that I bring that experience to it. When I would go to a fire, I wouldn't just look where, all the other cameras and reporters are looking, maybe at the fire chief talking about what happened. I'm looking behind to see the small details. Maybe there's a little stuffed animal or a ring shining in the rubble that's behind me that tells a story about somebody who lived in that house. And so, and I bring that level of detail to the novels that I'm writing because, like it matters that to me that Lena smokes Newports, or that Eli drinks Bud. That's the brand of beer he drinks. So those are the kinds of details that I think make my storytelling more interesting and unique. And another aspect of journalism is just broadcast writing style. I was always writing for the ear. And when I'm, writing my manuscript, I go back and I reread aloud what I wrote the day before, and I can hear the rhythm and the cadence of the language, and I can hear a discordant note. So those are just a few of the things that I've, taken from my journalism career.
I love that. I feel as though journalists know how to tell a story too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
When the journalists come in, I think, oh, good, I'm going to get story, from these guys, and the punctuation is going to be spot on. Always know. My dad was a TV journalist too, so I'm sitting here like fangirling on you even more than I did before, and I probably saw you in West Palm at some point.
Oh, okay. I don't know if I knew you were there.
Nope, no. I was just like sitting eating ice cream with my mom.
Oh, okay.
Watching the news,
Gotcha.
So that was it. But it's such a great answer.
Yeah.
And there's a scene in the book that involves guns, which I won't go into that much more, but I always envy authors who can write action sequences and make them look so effortless. And do you think that also may be a little bit of a hangover from the journalism writing?
Maybe. I know I struggled a little bit with that, because that's kind of part of the plot, the action and all that. I'm definitely more of a character-driven writer. And so the gun part, that's all, plot. And I remember getting one review. I think it was, I can't remember who, I think it was one of the trades, said that there was a powder keg of a plot. And I was like, ooh, really? Because I always feel like I struggle so much with those kinds of scenes. But yeah, I definitely learned too, just in when I used to think I was writing mysteries, there's that whole axiom of if there's a gun in act 1, it better go off by act 3. Yep. So I won't say if a gun goes off or not, but that's definitely one of those rules.
Yep. And I think the hat trick for the novelist is making the audience forget that there was a gun in act 1. So when it reappears in act 3, you're like, oh my God, the gun. Oh, I should have. When I see it in act 1, I'm like, oh yeah, I see what's going on here. And then I forget if the novelist done a good job. It's so great. We had a comment too about the science writing in the book. Ruth is a scientist. She's an engineer, or as her friend Natasha says, a doctor or whatever.
Right, whatever. It's all the same thing.
It's all up there somewhere. How did you make the science writing so accessible? One of your readers wants to know.
Yes, I have no science background at all. I was horrible in math and science. My subject, was English all the way, and some history. But yeah, so the chemical engineer piece, she's a chemical engineer at a consumer packaged goods company. And I have a cousin who's a chemical engineer at a consumer packaged goods company. So I called him and talked to him a lot about some of those processes and the mixing of those chemicals, and just wanted to make sure I got that as right as I could. And so that was me just talking to experts about that.
It was done with such a light touch, but again, it was folded into the book in such a way that it was so seamless. And I felt like, okay, now I know how to make homemade laundry detergent, which is, another great thing about reading this book. You should have like a little recipe in the back. It's like,
right.
We would all be making it, grating our soap. What was your favorite scene to write?
Oh, Favorite.
This is from the Jew and Juicy, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The Jew and Juicy,
The
as in J-U.
J-U. Yeah, yeah.
When you say Jew, the
No, that's me.
J-U.
I'm like the J-E-U and Juicy, but like that's the different one. It's your
Yeah.
J-U to your C-Y.
Yeah, yeah. So that's Julie's question. Thanks
It
for that
is.
question, Julie.
Okay.
I would say my favorite scene is one in the bar where um, Ruth is talking to her brother Eli. I really love the character of Eli. He was actually my favorite character to create, even though he's not, one of the point of view characters. But there's just a moment where there's been all this tension between them, and there's so many secrets, and he's holding so much back. And then he starts to emote and connect on a real level with her. Like in the beginning, he's just kind of picking at her and, who do you think you are coming back here after all these years being uppity, with your Claire Huxtable suits. And, there's just all this, sibling tension. But in that scene, he starts to open up about what it's like to be a Black man in America, what it's like to have lost his job and to not have his children with him. And so that was my favorite scene to write. And I have Ruth say it, I'm not going to get this right, the way I said it, but, she talks about how this is so unusual and that he's opening up this way. And that usually when men are in pain, she talks about how they run it off on the basketball court, or, they bury their pain deep inside a woman, so some of that writing was my favorite writing, just about them and that relationship and that moment of connection between them.
Same. I dog ear the pages of every book that I love. You can see like how many dog ears there are in this. And that was one of my favorite scenes. It reminded me so much of talking with my brother, how we talk best when we're side by side, not looking at each other. That women tend to talk well when they're looking face to face. We mirror, we do all the things. But
Mhm.
and when I'm walking with my brother or when I'm driving in a car with him, all of a sudden, all of these, true Joey stories come out. And I just think that's such a privilege. And you got that so right. It was such
Yeah. And it's so interesting how you talk about the way you're facing, because when you're sitting in a bar, you're facing, the rows of glasses or liquor there. You know what I mean? You're not necessarily face to face with each other when you're sitting on a bar stool next to somebody.
Yes, and
No,
that
it's
dynamic
easier.
was so realistic. It was so spot on, and I loved him also. I think sometimes the side characters are the most fun to write. Or
I
the easiest
know,
to
I
write.
know. I loved Eli.
Who was the toughest character to write?
I would say the most difficult probably was Ruth, my main character. I think because we had so many things in common.
Yeah.
I didn't have a baby though. People sometimes want to know that. Like, no, I didn't have a baby yet.
Do people ask you that?
Right. I have had a couple people, not in an interview like this, but I've had people ask me when I've workshopped this in different places, ask me if that's part of my experience. Like, no, I don't have to have lived all these experiences. But some parts of it are like me, just being a Black woman, professional. So those experiences are similar. So it was kind of tough when you're writing a character who's like you in some ways, because you want to make her unique and flawed. And you know what I mean? I just wanted to bring some more depth to her. And so she was definitely one of the more difficult characters for me to try to get right.
I always find that experience whenever I have a female narrator who's most like me, she is the toughest to write. And then I graft all these improbabilities onto her and these weird traits so people won't think she's me. And then
Right.
all the feedback I get from editors is like, this character is so unlikable. And I'm like, but she's me. How could she be unlikable? I hate you. But I love the fictional ones who just come into your head and dwell there.
Yes.
And I thought Midnight must have been like that for you a little bit, but also Ruth reads like that. So, if I'm not looking at the author, I feel as though Ruth is somebody whose skin I can get into and walk around, feel what the world
That's
is like.
good that you said that. And that you mentioned the unlikable character, that you've experienced that, because some of the criticism I've heard is, oh, she's unlikable, yeah. So
And I always think, we
lost.
talk about this in writing workshop sometimes. Does the character have to be likable or does she have to be real? And I always
I go for real. I err on the side of a real character. Like, okay, so what if you're reading a book about a serial killer? Okay, not very likable, but I still am interested and invested in, where they're going to go and what their journey is.
Right, exactly. Somebody has to be interesting and human.
And I wonder how much of that is about women, female characters, that people put that on them, that they need to be liked, because we all as women have, not all, but quite often we have that feeling that we need to be liked and we want people to like us in many of the circles we're in and environments we are in. And I wonder about women readers, do they bring that to the narrative? Because that's usually who I hear it from is women, when they see women protagonists, sometimes who are flawed or messy and complicated, there's that, thing of, oh, she's not very likable.
Well, that's so interesting. My last book, I had a protagonist who had an affair, and the reads on her, I remember one of my beta readers who I love so much and who actually took me out and sat me down with like a big drink. And she's like, I'm going to say something really bad to you now about your character. I'm like, oh God, let me chug this. And she said, you didn't actually intend her to be likable, right? Because she's really unlikable. And I was like, oh, that's what you gave me the drink for? I don't care if she's likable or not. But it was interesting because none of the female readers really took to this character. And it was partly because she had had an affair. But I thought, why are we doing this sort of scarlet letter thing to ourselves in this stage? Ladies, give us a break. Like, give each other a break. People are just people. They're all human.
Yeah, there's this slut shaming and all that. And, yeah.
And that was the only way my character could have gotten out of a bad marriage. Damn it. Speaking of likable characters, can I just mention Javier and how when I was watching The Bachelor last night, I was like, oh, that's who he is. Like Matt James. Okay. Like he's just this beautiful, like her husband.
You're talking about Xavier.
Xavier. Sorry. Oh my God.
Okay.
I mispronounce everything.
That's okay.
Here. Yes. Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Yes,
I love Xavier. I haven't heard it as much now, but earlier when I was having people read earlier drafts of it, everybody was like, I want more of him. More.
Yep, he does remind me of like Matt James in The Bachelor. Matt James reminds me of him. It's just like,
oh, is this the new Bachelor?
Yeah, the new Bachelor.
Okay, I haven't been watching. This is the first Black Bachelor, right? Okay, there's a lot of controversy. We won't get into all that, but yeah.
No, I would love to do. Can we
with Chris Harrison? I heard there's some controversy.
Yes, and with one of the Bachelorettes. Okay, so Belmont, please invite us back so we can have like a discussion about The Bachelor, please. But anyway, if you guys are watching this season, I feel as though like Matt James looks like I picture Xavier to look in the book. It's just this very suave, very put together guy who's very charismatic also and is trying to create like this better life for himself and create the whole atmosphere around him. And I think you did such a great job with him. So
thank you. Yeah, I love creating the marriage and and there's a lot of love between them as a couple, but then the socioeconomic piece just keeps cropping up between them too. I think, with the fact that he always has come from one of those more upper middle class backgrounds, and yet Ruth is still, thinking about her past and where she comes from. And that's why she asked him, like, why do you tell people I'm from Indianapolis when I'm really from Ganton? And he's like, well, because people have heard of Indianapolis. But for her, it's all about bringing up the insecurities of the kind of town she grew up in. And that just keeps surfacing between them.
It's like that economic passing thing again, right? It's like, you don't need to gloss over this. I'm fine. And also the way he wants her to have a kid right away, or is like really, it's time. And she's like, I need to self-fulfill first. This might not be quite in my plan. So there's a lot of juicy stuff here. Uncle Ron wants to know, what has been the most surprising reaction to The Kindest Lie?
Oh, the most surprising reaction. That's a really good question, Ron. I've been getting a lot of my mind immediately goes to like negative Goodreads comments.
Go for it.
Which I shouldn't, my mind shouldn't go there because it's one of those things that we shouldn't be reading. And this is just a ridiculous comment. But I had one woman say, I did not finish it because I did not vote for Obama and I'm not a socialist.
Oh,
I'm like, really?
Sorry.
No. I laughed when I first read it. Like, oh my God, really?
So I'm going to invite you to be part of our Mean Tweets project. I started sort of inadvertently on Twitter. Chris Bajalian said one time that like people have been reviewing his latest book. They would give him a terrible review, but then tag him to make sure that he saw it. And he was like, please don't tag me when you do a terrible review of my book, that, just let it float out there. And I said, we should do a Mean Tweets thing where each author is reading his or her worst review. So we are doing that.
You are doing that? Yeah, that would be a perfect one.
I will hook you up. We're going to drop it on April 1st. We have a video of a whole bunch, including Jodi Picoult and
good.
Klein. Like we all have these awful things that we can't stop reading through our fingers. But have you gotten?
Yeah. You mentioned Jodi Picoult. I'm just going to do a little plug that Ruth and I are having an event, Cuyahoga County Public Library. Jodi and I are going to be in conversation talking about fiction and race in America on March 22nd. So just wanted to give that little plug. But on the other hand, so that was my bad, my negative experience of the surprising thing. I'm like, oh my God, really? But I've had so many people who've just told me how they've connected with the book. And I think just the surprising part has been how people have opened up to me about their life stories. Like one person told me that I think it was her mother who committed suicide. And so much of her relationship with her mother reminded her of Ruth and Ruth's grandmother, Mama, in the book. And she said in reading my book, she got some understanding and closure about her relationship with her mother who had died, and just things like that you're like, wow, you never know or realize that the things that you write are connecting with people in such a meaningful, visceral way. And that's the part that I really love.
That's beautiful. It's such a profound responsibility to be a lightning rod in that way, and such a humbling, amazing thing.
It is. It is. It's such a responsibility, and I take it very seriously too.
Same. When I was out on tour in real life, sometimes people would tell me stories about their parents who never talked about the Holocaust or who talked about the war. And I would go back to my hotel room and, sit in my Spanx and have a giant cheeseburger and a glass of wine and just weep, because I would think, I don't know if I'm worthy to be the recipient of these things, but I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that people are able to tell me the stories, like Eli telling Ruth a story on a bar stool. Like there's something that breaks down that barrier between people, and they can talk to you, and it's just a gift.
It is. It is. I have one more surprising thing, not about the book, but just on this whole journey, how wonderful people have been to me, just the readers I've met, and the fact that I've had so many readers say, when you come through on tour in my town, you can stay with me at my house. And like, I don't even know these people, but we've gotten to know each other through social media and through these events. And yeah, I've just been offered places to stay by so many people. Some people have written me cards. They've got my address and they've written to me and really extended an invitation to come visit. And yeah, it's just been beautiful, the connections I've made with people. I'm so grateful.
Oh, I love that. I'm so glad you said that. I was going to ask you what this ride has been like to put your first book. This is probably the last question, because we've kept everybody I could talk to you for hours. We've kept everybody
I know, I could talk to you for hours too.
I love this. Thank you. But I've been wondering what this ride was like to have your first book out in the world and to have a tremendous response. I know it must be overwhelming and exciting and all the things. So please, what does it feel like to you?
It's all those things at the same time. Because, going into it, you have no idea what to expect because everybody's journey is so different. And I'm in a lot of these groups, like with Julie and with other writers, where we talk about, our journeys. And so I've had the privilege of hearing from people who've gone through it and then come before me, but everybody's experience is completely different. So no one prepared me for like all the interviews and all the, all the Q&As that I do, and the essays and the listicles and the podcast interviews and the book events and just the book plates that you sign and send off, and just so many parts of the process that have been fun, but also overwhelming at the same time. I'd say some of the cooler things have been being reviewed by the Washington Post and the LA Times. That's really cool. And, such esteemed publications. And, but I think one of the coolest things was being in Entertainment Weekly across from the Foo Fighters. Like, I never would have imagined being in a magazine like that. And so that was pretty awesome. So many fun parts of it. I never thought I would have an uncle for my book. That was a story we talked about that I was going to mention earlier. Caroline Levitt, our dear friend Caroline, is the one who connected me with Ron Block and told Ron that he would love this book. And I guess she was right. She knows him very well. And he read the book and really just connected on such a meaningful, visceral level with the book. And he declared himself the uncle to the book. And so it's so cool that my book has an actual uncle. I never expected that. So that's been a real blessing. And Ron has been wonderful about just introducing my book to so many readers. And I'm grateful.
Ron knows everybody. Caroline knows
I'm going to start crying, get emotional.
Yeah. Well, the book is a gift that you give to the world. So the gifts that you get are things that you earned. And we really so appreciate the gift of your time tonight and the behind the scenes on this book. Everybody, if you haven't bought at least 50 copies of The Kindest Lie, you should buy at least 50.
At least 50.
At least 50. At least. And Mother's Day is coming. So
I know that's a great Mother's Day gift.
It's a great, what else is coming? St. Patrick's Day, because there's a Patrick in the book. You
There
should
is a Patrick.
Yep. Mhm.
I love that.
Yep. And there's midnight, and midnight is coming. So just buy a lot of copies.
Yeah, before midnight. Bye. Yeah.
All right.
Oh, you're so funny.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for doing this, Jenna. You're the
My
best.
pleasure. My pleasure.
Oh, Nancy and Jenna, thank you both. This was a great conversation. I think people really enjoyed it, and we appreciate your time. Nancy, thank you for writing the book, which was so enjoyable.
Yes.
Thank you to everybody for coming. I hope that someday soon we will see you at in-person events, but for now, this is good too.
It is. Thank you for having
Everybody-
us, Stacy. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
it's our pleasure.
Yeah. So
Really.
please buy your copy through Belmont Books, please.
Yes, you must buy it through Belmont, all 50
Yes.
copies each.
All 50. Yes.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.